Meanwhile, the APC crisis in Kwara State has snowballed, with one of the aggrieved factions decamping to the Young Progressives Party, YPP. Yakub Kubir, a frontliner of the Zero to Otoge struggle, actually, in 2019, is the arrowhead of this aggrieved faction. Spokesman of the faction and coordinator of Kwara 3rd First, Malam Abdul Fattah Abdul Rahman, said the final decision to dump the All Progressives Congress came after wide consultations. He said the inability of the Kwara State APC to demonstrate fairness, equity, and provide a level playing field for every member of the party caused them to decamp.
Well, to discuss Arise news analyst Dr. Sam AMADI joins us now on Newsnight. Thank you so much for joining us, of course. Well, let's begin with what the APC says, that the wave of crises that have trailed, the recent World Congresses are just a family affair. As a matter of fact, the chairman of the Caretaker Extraordinary Convention Planning Committee says the World Congresses were actually very successful.
Well, I think I could say so based on Nigerian experience. Our Congresses, especially the two major parties, have always been conflictual, somewhat chaotic, so nothing new. Also, ultimately, it would say it's a success to the extent that the party find a way to validate those results. But then, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's full of conflicts in many states. For example, in Imo State, in some places it didn't happen, in some places there were chaos here and there. But again, it speaks to the inability of the political parties to develop some kind of rule-based process that constrains ambition and behavior. I mean, it can have rules that say you're going to have direct primary or indirect primary. You can have rules that set out who makes rules, but then actors don't have incentive to obey those rules. So what we've seen in the two major parties is that they pay out in politics. The winner takes all. And primarily because the victory is not about responding to citizens' demands. So for example, in the US, you see that the politicians hack to the base, what people want.
Yes.
So that plays a disciplinary control over the process, because you know that people are watching and they will throw you out through votes. But because our votes don't count that much, because the electoral process is gameable, it creates incentive for people to override the rules. So the APC is in a position where they can't even fix it. The PDP will fall in the same path when they start our Congress. There will be very obvious violation of the rules. There will be some daredevil here and there. People try to hijack things, and somehow they get a result because the party will defer to those who have the power to get this done.
And so the pockets too.
And
the pockets.
When you say votes don't count, are you not discouraging people from going out to vote? But that's not my question.
This doesn't count. I mean, the incredibility in the process.
All right, okay, the process, fine. I wanted to get that clear. Now, what do you make of the 37-man committee set up by the APC to, men reconcile, so to say, and the fact that both parties, both top parties, the APC and the PDP, at the same time are having these myriad of challenges? What do you think? What does that portend? What does that speak about the political process, both for Nigeria and then for both parties?
Sure, it tells you one thing, that this is not about, it's not a kind of personality-based crisis. So it's not because APC has bad guys, PDP has good guys. It's not because, so it's basically that the political maturity, the culture of politics and the incentive structure of politics is such that creates this level of turbulence, this level of unmediated, unconstrained context and conflicts. So if the two parties are having in fact, at the same time, they're having challenges to their leadership, and it always happens close to a convention, which tells you that it's a function of fluidity. The rules are not clear, the points are not settled, everybody fancies the chance to torpedo the boat, and then it's like hijack. You hijack the gravy train, you take over. But in rule-based process, the culture changes. People now strategize on how to win fair. And if they lose, they look at alternatives. You speak to the public. So primarily, it's a system crisis. And the question is, what comes first? Do we have to fix the political parties so the political parties will fix the electoral process? Or do you have to fix the electoral process so that the disparate effect of more clean election imposes a challenge on party leadership to get it right.
Because and rub off on the electoral process
exactly. That's
as
really
a whole.
Where we are now.
I wonder what you'd say then about this issue of consensus that's meant to, avoid some of this crisis that you talk about. In the case of the APC, is it consensus carried too far? And then address also the idea of not going to court, asking members of the party not to go to court. They are aggrieved members, of course. How does that deepen democracy?
I think they're all wrong approaches. You see, the idea of consensus works well if there are rules. Everybody knows there will be a process that converge. So, for example, if the party had led the process where super delegates, whatever they are, whether they are legislators, whether they are governors, everything will funnel to that point where the governors will make a decision. Maybe something close to the Communist Party of China, where whoever becomes Secretary General is a matter of some, benevolent elites who understand what should be done, and they access your records and say, this is a guy. If these are well known, orderly, if there's a culture and a structure for that, people, get used to the fact that ultimately the party will try to create a consensus around based on criteria that are established. But when you're afraid of the reality of contest and competition, when you are reading where the power is flowing, that if you open up to real competition, someone takes it away, and that person is not the person you want to, say, what a consensus is a shorthand. Is
it rigging by another name?
Absolutely. So the question around, what's the question again about? Okay, go ahead.
Two questions for you, brief questions that you answer. One, you talked about rule-based process. It's one thing to identify a problem, another thing to give the solution.
Sure.
How do we get the rule-based process that you're talking about? That's one. And then with these things happening in the parties, you're looking at, you're projecting, how does it affect leadership?
Absolutely, good question.
When eventually they take the reins of power? Whoever takes it.
Let's start with that first. You see, when a process is such that it's not rule-based and not bankable, they're not predictable, when leaders emerge, they govern with lack of predictability. They don't follow the rules anymore. They behave outside the rule. They actually transgress rules because it's a case of, you can actually bend the rules. So it's like you learn from politics becomes the representation of governance. Again, the issue around the solution, I argue that if you want to create rule-based, predictable primaries, you need to empower the regulator, the INEC, to have much more. That's why it's regrettable, the poor jurisprudence of the Supreme Court and other courts that kind of treats INEC as a lame dog. The regulator should have the power then to articulate first clear criteria. If you want to do primaries, these are the process. Our laws are too meager, too just routine. If you look at the rules governing elections elsewhere, they are detailed. You're going to create intelligible criteria. This is a process for a primary. These are the steps that must be taken. This is the documentation process. Now, when you create those rules, they constrain behavior. So the party leaders know that they have to really follow these rules this way. So I think we have to do two things. INEC has to be much more procedural, much more detailed in their regulation of political parties.
But can INEC be without being, there are attempts already to weaken this regulator that you talk about?
Wrong jurisprudence. You see, the regulator is INEC, just like the central, just like NEC, NCC. They must at every time have the power to make a determination, quasi-judicial power.
How
to say this is
INEC
wrong.
Get
INEC
this power?
So you go back to the NAS? Is that what you're saying?
There's nothing in the Constitution or the Electoral Act that actually says INEC cannot. The Constitution says that INEC rulemaking processes are not subject to the presidential, executive, or legislative determination. INEC has a right to make these rules.
Do they understand this?
I've been saying this for like last 2 years on Arise, that INEC is a regulator, primarily not a transaction of agency. Your job is to make rules. Your job is to enforce those rules. Your job is to make a determination. Somebody has, for example, the Constitution says you can choose primary, direct, or indirect primary, okay? Yeah. Now, INEC has to make rules that say this is how you do direct and indirect. And those rules must be specific and constraining.
Are you sure they don't have it? But the political parties are flouting it.
That's why I like what INEC is doing in Anambra State, for example. INEC should come and say this process failed the test. And the court should now defer to INEC, except where INEC has acted illegally. Okay. That's the principle in the Chevron case by U.S. Supreme Court, that you must defer to regulator because he has the expertise to make the decision.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Dr. Sam AMADI, Arise News Analyst. Thank you so much.